nice to have you here. Again, I'm Sunil Gauri. I'm the Senior Technical Architect here at Impetus. So today we are actually launching the second version of our product, Unity Catalog Migration Accelerator 2.0. And thanks for coming, So let's get started. So today's data governance is actually complex, and this diagram kind of actually shows why it is actually a bit complex, So we have all the data consumers and as well as the data producers on this side, creating or adding data sets at scale. And then we have a data governance team which believes in data democratization, but also wants to figure out how secure these assets are, who's accessing these assets, and then am I meeting my regulatory compliance, So with all these moving things in the data lake platform, right? So making sure that we have a good view of our data assets becomes very critical. And that's where actually kind of Unity Catalog comes in. So I'll move to the next slide here. So Unity Catalog, at the core of it, here are some of the things it actually helps us achieve. One, the data discovery becomes a lot more easier, not just the data, but also the processes associated with creating those data assets. Your access controls, because of the fine-grained access control that it actually supports, your access control actually becomes a lot more easier and centralized, and you are able to kind of manage that from a single point, Then the lineage. Again, as data assets keep getting added, you want to know what processes as well as what data assets are actually getting created and what is being consumed. So having this lineage, the end-to-end lineage, kind of becomes very critical, and that's where Databricks Unity Catalog is good at, Then the next thing is monitoring. Having a good visibility and being able to observe from a monitoring standpoint kind of helps. And then auditing and data sharing. This is more about the federated queries that Databricks Unity Catalog is able to support. Now, assuming that we've actually sold on Unity Catalog, what are some of the considerations that we would want to keep in mind as we are migrating to Unity Catalog? One is to understand the complexities of the end-to-end migration. We are not just dealing with a metastore migration. We are also looking at the tables, the views, the notebooks, the clusters, you name it, you have it. All of these things actually need an end-to-end view when we actually plan for this overall migration. The second thing is to how do we avoid business disruption when we have this migration planned, The third thing is, do we have enough access to be able to do this kind of a migration or an upgrade to Unity Catalog? And the fourth one is, does my team really have the expertise to be able to go through these utilities that are there outside and be able to kind of empower them to kind of actually move or successfully do the migration to Unity Catalog? So these are some of the considerations that you might want to keep in mind as we are actually planning for a UC migration. Now, what's Impetus' solution? I'm just going to talk about it. So UCMA 2.0 actually follows a 4-step methodology. I'm going to talk about the architecture and how we have designed this product and what are some of the salient features of this product. But before I get there, let's look at this. On the left-hand side, I have my legacy metastore. It could be my AWS Glue catalog, or it could actually be my Hive metastore. On the right-hand side, I actually have my Unity catalog. That's going to be the future state. How does UCMA actually achieve this? The 4th-step methodology that I was talking about, we start with an assessment. Basically, the assessment does a complete scan of your workspaces and your inventory. When I talk about the inventory, it is your notebooks, your tables, your views, your clusters, so on and so forth, and gives you a comprehensive report in terms of how ready your Databricks workspace is to be able to migrate to Unity Catalog. So when we come or we do this assessment, at least from a high level, you would be knowing what the migration strategy is, how much time this migration is going to take, and also be able to prepare your team, that is your data consumers, and tell them that this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to change next. Be prepared to be able to validate it and start using Unity Catalog going forward. That's something that comes out of this assessment phase. Once we are done with the assessment phase, we have the migration phase. Again, this is also another module or a microservice that our product kind of uses, which helps you migrate from your existing Metastore onto the Unity Catalog. Here, each of the components that are involved are actually dealt separately and differently from one another. For example, the way you change your mount point locations is handled differently by a different module versus how you would actually handle your table and views migration. Same thing goes with your cluster upgrades. When we do the cluster upgrades or the cluster migration, we are looking at, is my cluster running the latest DBR version? Do I have all the libraries that are actually needed in the old cluster, have it migrated also to the new cluster or not? Are there any dependencies that may not work, which would actually cause the cluster to actually fail to initiate? Or what are the other patches and workarounds that I need to be putting it in place so that this cluster is enabled for Unity Catalog? So that's something that gets handled as part of the migration itself. The last piece is with regards to your workflows. So Unity Catalog migration is just not about migrating to a catalog, right? Or a Metastore repoint. What happens is your notebooks that are actually like creating these data assets have references to these tables, to the DBFS location where the files are present, how they are accessing it. All of these things are actually involved. So you would not be able to scan through each and every of these notebooks to find out if some user or some developer has left a hard coding that actually is pointing to a location that you have not repointed or considered. Also, the other thing that you need to keep in mind is some of the syntaxes that actually work in your existing code may not be working on the Unity Catalog. A good example could be that you have a process or a notebook that is actually creating a bucketed table, right? You migrate to Unity Catalog, you lose the bucketing option at all completely. Some code is actually doing an alter table or an alter partition command, right? After it loads the data. That's not going to work on Unity Catalog. So how are you going to scan through all of these artifacts and be able to tell whether I've done a complete good migration, which is actually foolproof or not? And that is where our tool comes in very handy. And that's something that we handle as part of a migration itself. The next one is, now that I've actually done the migration, how good is my validation? Am I able to run these jobs on the new cluster, and then able to kind of start using Unity Catalog, So validation is what the other framework or the module handles, wherein we do a simultaneous comparison of your existing workspaces and the jobs that are running and the data assets that is created versus the data that actually is got migrated to Unity Catalog, And the comparison gives you a good understanding as to where exactly the gaps are, so that we can again go back and repeat cycle number 2, that is migration, to only on those affected points and be able to do a good migration. So validation, again, built in part of the code there as a module in itself that can actually be like isolated and fixed and rerun how many ever times you want. Finally, the operationalization, that is now that you have your other workspace, which is Unity Catalog enabled ready, when do you do the cutover and how do we do the cutover? And that's what the module with regards to operationalization handles. So under the hood, so this is a simple high-level view. Now, what is happening under the hood is what I'm going to talk in the next slide. So let's look at that, right? Here, one of the things that we were actually thinking when we were developing the product was like, hey, Databricks already has UCX. So why do I have to go and kind of build something from scratch, So what we did was we have actually designed this based on a microservices-based architecture, wherein we can leverage some of the utilities that are already available from the Databricks standpoint. But what we have focused more is on the limitations that actually are there, and also addressing some of the complexities, in terms of writing those codes or having those migration scripts ready so that you don't miss anything, So we are leveraging some of UCX as we have built this particular product. So again, on the left-hand side, you have your legacy Metastore. We do upgrades of our tables and views. Then we also have your local groups. When we talk about local groups, Unity Catalog does not support workspaces local groups, right? The groups that are local to workspaces. Now, that migration is also handled by our tool, and that is exactly what we have actually built or tried to address, one of the concerns that is there. how do I upgrade my cluster? That is when I'm actually using, say, Scala 2.0 or Spark 11, 12, right? So most of the times, or what we have seen is people are running older DBRs, right? Databricks runtimes. So migrating to UCX is not just about migrating the catalog, but also upgrading your cluster and your runtimes. So as you upgrade your runtimes, there are certain things or aspects of the code that you need to actually refactor and be able and make it a lot more efficient for the new runtime. This could be some of the depreciated functions or that needs to be addressed, and that is what this tool kind of takes into consideration. And pretty much that's about the microservices or the architecture of UCX. So let's quickly get into some of the why would we choose this accelerator. Again, our accelerator is one stop shop, wherein everything is UI based, which has a very good graphical interface. We'll get to that shortly. It helps you do the migration like easily with a click of a button, and then you decide what aspect of the code you would like to migrate. So maybe you don't want to migrate all of the workspaces at once. You want to do workspace by workspace. Maybe you want to start with migrating just the mount points first, or repointing the mount points first. Maybe you want to first migrate a part of a database or the complete database itself, or maybe identify certain tables that you think are actually like eligible candidates for your migration. So this actually, the interface is so user-friendly that you would be able to identify certain sections of the components and only do the migration for those, so that your business actually sees value to it. So it need not be all at once. You can phase your migration in a way that actually minimizes business disruption, and at the same time, everyone is prepared for the change that is coming. So here are some of the salient features that our tool offers. Again, I think I've covered some of the aspects here. The cluster upgrades. You're able to migrate your groups, Automated notebook migration. Again, scans through all your notebooks, tells what are the places wherein you might need a syntax correction, or maybe you have some hard codings that needs to be corrected and parameterized, And also the other feature that we are able to do here with our migrator or the accelerator is tagging your data assets, So right now, when we talk about Unity Catalog, discovery is a big part of the overall Unity Catalog, right? Now, how is Unity Catalog able to discover assets for you? That's because someone actually went there and started tagging these assets, But if you have a 10,000 table database, nobody is going to sit and manually keep tagging assets, by individually one by one. So that is where our UCMA accelerator comes in handy, So it is able to pick up certain comments based on the description of the table, description of the column, and be able to apply those as part of the tagging mechanism itself, so that you're enabling discovery at a much better pace and rate, So this is something that you would end up doing manually, but trust me, nope. Okay, yeah, sorry. Now let's look at some of the things like how does the interface look like. So again, what we actually do is this tool is something that would actually be installed on your network itself. We would just need a compute instance, that is a VM, virtual machine. And then we would be like, once this tool is installed and up and running, we do certain configurations. You would just need your Databricks account ID and then a username and password. So we are enabling OAuth as well, so that it is linked to your LDAP. So your security is taken care of, and this doesn't scan or actually goes through the proper security mechanisms that you have set up within the organization itself, right? Once I get there, what we do is we start with the assessment as we were speaking. The assessment is simple. It just basically tells you how prepared your workspace is for the Unity Catalog migration, So when I get a readiness with regards to the workspace itself, saying that how much percentage of my workspaces, tables, views, and other components are ready from a migration standpoint. So here we are looking at 13.6. That is the readiness of the migration. So what you will be able to do is also download the report and be able to look at what are the things that is actually like preventing me from actually having 100% migration ready. So that's something to look at. So you get this comprehensive view of your complete Databricks environment in this one place, right? Now, say for example, how do we start the assessment? Again, you just select whether you have a AWS Glue Metastore or you have your built-in Hive Metastore. Everything is ARN role driven. So you just give the ARN Amazon resource name, and based on that, it actually like you configure it and set up give the proper access to it. It goes and it actually like kinds of goes and starts scanning the code based on the access that you have granted, right? So you start the assessment. Now, once your assessment is done, you're ready for migration. You just go to the Catalog Explorer wherein you want to migrate your tables. You get the database names. You get the cluster. The cluster is already up and running. We do a code or infrastructure deployment as code itself as part of this UCX. So you have your cluster, which is UC enabled, up and running for you to actually be starting your migration as well. So you pick and select your tables that you want to migrate, and then you hit on the migrate button, right? So when you do the migration, it actually supports both managed table migration, external table migration, and you can also do a cross-table migration as well, wherein you can switch your external to managed to external as well. And once you're done with your migration, again, and that's the feature that I was talking about, so you have your default feature, you have your managed, you have your external, you can define how you want to do the migration to happen, and then you hit on the validate. Let me go back. Yeah. The validate option is basically once the table gets migrated, it decides whether it has to do a shallow clone or a, I'll get to the questions later. Come again? We are. There's support being built for Azure as well. Yeah. So based on the table, it decides whether it has to do a deep clone, shallow clone, it has to do a CTAS, so on and so forth. Everything happens under the hood. Once that is ready, the migrate is done, you can actually go ahead and validate. The validate does a black box kind of a testing, basically to make sure that the data is intact and the data complies with Unity Catalog standards and limitations, And then you get the statistics of the comparison as well, which is basically a analytical function that says if the data has deviated or not once you have done the reorg of the data as you're migrating, So next is how do I switch my mount points? Again, easily configurable. You just select what is your source, what is your mount point, and where do you want to like repoint it to, and it actually takes care of that. Your cluster upgrades, you just select your existing cluster, tell which cluster you're trying to clone or migrate, and then hit the button, migrate button. It actually creates a new cluster with the new DBR with all the libraries intact. It just clones the cluster with all the dependencies and libraries intact. So your cluster is up and running with UC migrate enabled. And then your jobs, same thing happens with your jobs. And I'm going to skip the jobs and get back to the notebooks. Same thing happens with your notebooks. You just give where your path of your notebook is, scans the code, prepares the notebook, makes all the syntax changes that needs to happen. If there is any hard coding or any other file locations or other things that is being pointed, it takes care of that. Namespace updates, again, applies the namespace updates to actually point to the new catalog, and your notebooks are ready. Once again, how do you validate it? It runs the new notebook, it runs the old notebook, compares the result of both these notebooks and actually makes sure that the output is validated. At the same time, it actually does a code scan as well to ensure that the code is compiling accurately. So that's also baked into the product itself. And then finally, you have a UI to actually track how your migration is progressing. If there is anything, as you're doing this in batches and as you're doing it at an object level, you kind of actually can keep a track of who is migrating what and what is the status of the migration, what are the reasons for the migration to have failed, and fix only those pipelines that actually need to be addressed. So this summary board kind of helps you keep a track of what all you've migrated. So that's pretty much about our UCMA 2.0. If you have any questions with regards to this, and if you want to see a hands-on demo, stop by booth 113. We would be more than happy to walk you through the details of it.